I covered my family's rent, groceries, and car payments for years. The one time I asked for help after surgery, my mom declared, "You're not our responsibility." So I stopped paying. 3 weeks later, they were begging in my driveway. I never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am, still processing what happened 3 weeks ago. My hands are shaking as I type this, not from anger anymore, but from the sheer disbelief at how quickly everything unraveled. Let me start from the beginning. 5 years ago, I landed a decent job in tech after years of struggling through college while working multiple part-time jobs. Finally, I could breathe. My salary wasn't extraordinary, but it was stable, and after years of eating ramen and sharing apartments with 3 other people, I felt rich. My family had always struggled financially. Dad left when I was 12, and Mom raised my 2 younger sisters while working at a grocery store. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and I watched her stress lines deepen with each passing year. When I got my job, I didn't think twice about helping out. It started small, covering groceries here and there, helping with utility bills when they got behind. Then Mom's hours got cut. The grocery store was downsizing, and at 52, she wasn't exactly a priority for management. My younger sister was still in high school, and my other sister had just started community college. The math was simple. They needed help, and I could provide it. So I became the family bank. Rent, car payments, insurance, groceries, school supplies, you name it, I covered it. My own apartment was a studio in a not great neighborhood, but I didn't mind. Family comes first, right? That's what Mom always taught us. For 5 years, I handed over roughly 70% of my income every month. I automated transfers, set up payment schedules, made sure everyone had what they needed. My sisters got new clothes for school while I wore the same 5 shirts on rotation. Mom got her medication while I put off dental work for 2 years. I never complained. Not once. When friends invited me out, I made excuses about being tired rather than admit I couldn't afford a $20 dinner. When I wanted to take weekend trips or buy a decent car, I reminded myself that my comfort wasn't worth my family's stability. 3 months ago, everything changed. I'd been having severe abdominal pain for weeks, but like everything else in my life, I kept putting it off. Between work deadlines and family obligations, there never seemed to be time to deal with my own problems. When I finally collapsed at work and my colleague had to call an ambulance, the doctors found my appendix had nearly ruptured. The surgery went well, but the recovery was brutal. The doctor made it clear I needed at least 2 weeks of complete rest, followed by several more weeks of limited activity. No lifting, no driving, minimal walking. For someone who lived alone, this presented a real problem. That's when I made the mistake of thinking my family might step up for once. I called Mom from the hospital bed, still groggy from anesthesia. I explained the situation and asked if one of them could stay with me for a week or two, just to help with basic things like grocery shopping and making sure I didn't overdo it. I wasn't asking for nursing care or anything dramatic, just someone to be nearby in case I needed help. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched longer than I expected. When Mom finally responded, her words hit me like a physical blow. She said I was 31 years old and needed to handle my own problems. She reminded me that she had her own responsibilities and couldn't just drop everything because I was having health issues. Then came the words that still echo in my head. I wasn't their responsibility anymore. I hung up the phone and stared at the hospital ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. 5 years of sacrificing everything, and when I needed help for 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks, I was told I wasn't their responsibility. The next morning, my younger sister texted asking when the usual monthly transfer would come through because rent was due soon. The audacity was breathtaking. I was lying in a hospital bed, having been told I wasn't their responsibility, and she was asking for money. That's when something clicked in my brain. If I wasn't their responsibility, then they certainly weren't mine. I went home from the hospital to my empty studio apartment and spent the next 2 weeks recovering alone. Neighbors I barely knew checked on me more than my own family did. The elderly woman next door brought me soup. The college kid across the hall offered to pick up groceries. Complete strangers showed more concern for my well-being than the people I'd been supporting for 5 years. During those long, quiet days, I had plenty of time to think. I calculated that I'd given my family roughly $180,000 over 5 years. That money could have been a down payment on a house, a master's degree, early retirement contributions, or at the very least, a decent emergency fund for situations exactly like this. Instead, I was recovering from surgery alone in a cramped studio, ordering expensive delivery food because I couldn't drive to get groceries, and using up all my sick leave because I had no one to help me with basic tasks. 2 weeks later, when I was finally able to return to work part-time, I made a decision. I canceled every automatic transfer, every scheduled payment, every financial commitment I'd made to my family. All of it. Gone. I didn't announce it dramatically or send some long text explaining my reasoning. I simply stopped. For the first time in 5 years, my paycheck stayed in my account. The silence was beautiful. My bank balance actually grew week after week. I could afford to order dinner without checking my account first. I bought new clothes. I scheduled the dental work I'd been postponing. Small luxuries that most people take for granted felt revolutionary. For 3 weeks, my phone stayed blissfully quiet. No frantic texts about overdue bills or requests for grocery money. I almost started to believe they'd found another solution, maybe even achieved some independence. I should have known better. Update 1. Last Tuesday evening, I came home from work to find Mom's car in my apartment complex parking lot. She was sitting in the driver's seat, and both my sisters were with her. As I walked toward my building, she got out and approached me. What followed was the most uncomfortable conversation of my life. Mom's composure cracked almost immediately as she explained they were 3 weeks behind on everything. The landlord had given them notice. The car was about to be repossessed. They had maybe 2 days' worth of food left. She asked where the money was, why the transfers had stopped. When I explained that I was apparently not their responsibility, so I decided they weren't mine either, the conversation took a turn I wasn't prepared for. The tears started first. Mom broke down completely, saying she'd spoken out of stress and worry when I was in the hospital, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. She insisted they were family, that family helps family, that I couldn't just abandon them when they needed me most. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I needed them most, I was told I wasn't their responsibility. Now that they needed me, we were suddenly family again. But what really got to me was what happened next. My older sister started talking about how selfish I was being, how I was punishing them for one conversation, how I had more money than I needed anyway. She reminded me of everything Mom had sacrificed raising us alone, how the least I could do was help out now that I was successful. I stood in that parking lot, listening to them pile guilt on top of guilt, and felt something inside me harden. They weren't sorry about how they treated me. They were sorry about the consequences. I told them I needed time to think about it and went upstairs. From my window, I watched them sit in the car for another hour, probably strategizing their next approach. Update 2. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My sisters had apparently spent the night crafting increasingly desperate appeals for money. Some messages blamed me for their situation. Others tried guilt trips about childhood memories and family bonds. A few attempted negotiation, maybe I could just cover rent this month while they figured things out. But it was the message from my younger sister that really sealed my decision. She'd written a long text about how I was destroying the family, how Mom was crying constantly, how they might end up homeless because of my selfishness. Then she added something that made my blood boil. She said I owed them this money because they'd supported me emotionally all these years. Emotionally supported me? When exactly? When I was working 3 jobs to get through college. When I was recovering from surgery alone. When I was sacrificing every personal goal to keep them afloat financially. I realized then that in their minds, I wasn't a son or brother who'd been helping out. I was a resource to be managed. My feelings, needs, and well-being were irrelevant as long as the money kept flowing. That afternoon, I got a call from Mom's landlord. Somehow they'd given him my number as a reference or emergency contact, and he was calling to see if I'd be covering their rent. The conversation was enlightening. He mentioned that Mom had been telling him for months that her son would handle any payment issues, that I was good for it if she ever came up short. She'd been using me as a financial guarantee without even telling me. I was already their co-signer in every practical sense, just without any of the legal protections or recognition. I told the landlord I was not responsible for their rent and had never agreed to be. The confusion in his voice was evident. Clearly, Mom had painted a very different picture of our arrangement. Update 3. Saturday morning brought a new development. I was having coffee and finally enjoying a quiet weekend when someone started pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I could see Mom, but she wasn't alone. She'd brought backup, my aunt and uncle, who'd driven in from 2 hours away. What followed was essentially an intervention. They'd set up a whole presentation about family responsibility, about how successful people have obligations to help their relatives, about how I was breaking Mom's heart and destroying family unity. My aunt, who I see maybe twice a year, lectured me about gratitude and respect. My uncle, who's never contributed a cent to anyone's well-being, told me I was being childish and vindictive. Mom sat on my couch crying while they tag-teamed me with guilt. But then my uncle said something that clarified everything. He mentioned how proud the whole family was of my success, how I'd become the family breadwinner, how everyone looked up to me for financial leadership. He talked about it like it was my predetermined role, my destiny, my responsibility. That's when I understood, somewhere along the way, my family had decided I existed to fund their lives. Not contribute to, not help with, fund entirely. They'd gotten so comfortable with my support that they'd forgotten it was voluntary. I asked them a simple question. What exactly had they done to help themselves in the 5 years I'd been paying their bills? Had Mom looked for better jobs? Had my sisters considered that maybe they should work while going to school? Had anyone made any effort to reduce expenses or increase income? The silence was deafening. In 5 years of complete financial support, none of them had used that stability to improve their situation. They'd simply accepted it as their new normal and adjusted their lifestyle accordingly. My uncle started getting aggressive, saying I was being disrespectful and acting like I was better than them. He suggested that maybe I needed to be reminded where I came from, that success hadn't given me the right to look down on family. That's when I lost it. I told them exactly what I thought about being called selfish by people who'd taken $180,000 from me without ever saying thank you. I explained how I'd lived like a college student for 5 years so they could live comfortably. I described recovering from surgery alone while they asked for rent money. And then I told them the truth. They weren't my family anymore. Family doesn't use you as a personal ATM for 5 years and then call you selfish when you finally say no. Family doesn't tell you you're not their responsibility when you need help and then show up with guilt trips when they need money. Real family would have been in that hospital room with me. Real family would have helped me recover. Real family would have said thank you at least once in 5 years. I asked them to leave. When they hesitated, I mentioned that I was considering changing my phone number and possibly moving to a different city, somewhere I could start fresh without people who only valued me for my bank account. The panic in their faces was immediate. Mom started making promises about how things would be different, how they'd appreciate me more, how they'd find ways to help themselves. But I'd heard enough. Final update. It's been 2 weeks since that confrontation, and my phone has been mercifully quiet. I've heard through extended family that they found temporary housing with relatives, and both my sisters have gotten part-time jobs. Mom is apparently looking into job training programs. Yesterday, I received a letter in the mail from Mom. Not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter. In it, she apologized for everything, for taking my help for granted, for not being there when I needed support, for treating me like an obligation rather than a son. She didn't ask for money. She didn't make excuses. She just apologized and said she hoped someday I might be willing to have a relationship with them again, but she understood if I couldn't. It was the first time in 5 years anyone in my family had acknowledged my sacrifices or expressed genuine gratitude. The first time anyone had put my feelings before their financial needs. I'm not ready to forgive yet. The hurt runs too deep, and trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But for the first time since this whole thing started, I feel like maybe there's a chance for a real relationship with them someday, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. As for me, I've put a down payment on a 1-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. I've started saving for a house. I've made appointments for medical checkups I'd been postponing for years. I've even planned a vacation, my first in over 5 years. It turns out that when you're not supporting 4 adults on one income, life becomes a lot more manageable. Who knew? For anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, it's okay to say no. It's okay to prioritize your own well-being. And it's okay to expect the same consideration from family that you'd give to them. Being related to someone doesn't give them unlimited access to your resources, your time, or your emotional energy. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force people to stand on their own feet, even when they hate you for it. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about mutual care, respect, and support. Real family shows up when you're recovering from surgery. Real family says thank you. Real family doesn't disappear the moment the money stops flowing. I'm still figuring out what comes next, but for the first time in years, I'm figuring it out for myself.